Welcome to our Friday video for environmental economics. This one's going to be short and sweet, hopefully. So what I would like to do today is use a bit of a personal story to share how we can go from local to global. So after all, our environmental economics course is part of the Colonnade Connections local to global category. We talked earlier this week about how some environmental issues are handled at a local level. So municipal solid waste, the trash and recycling picked up behind your house, that's done at the local level. Almost all aspects of control are done locally. Something like climate change is done globally. A lot of things are. So it's a big issue and it's addressed at multiple stages. It's obviously a global issue, global climate change, right? Or global warming. The general view on the best way to tackle it is with concerted, coordinated, international, global efforts. So we can do things in our personal life to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Cities can do that. We see cities like Miami fortifying their shoreline against rising water, spending a lot of money on that. We see states doing things, California implementing its own little cap and trade program for carbon emissions. And then countries are doing things. So Canada has started some carbon emission programs. A lot of European countries, so actually the EU has a carbon emission cap and trade program. So these are things happening at the national level, or in the EU case, we're starting to bunch countries together. But really what it's going to take is a true global sort of effort to address it. And that's why the Kyoto Protocol was a big deal, the Paris Climate Accord is a big deal, the UN Convention dealing with climate change is a really important part of it. So we have issues that go local, we have issues that are global. How do we think about those in our personal lives? How do we think about dealing with those issues? So quick, a personal story. As I've told you guys, I grew up in a farming family, and so one thing that was going on, we grow asparagus, and my dad and brother were starting to experiment a little bit with irrigating their asparagus. So normally in Michigan, we get enough rainfall that you don't have to irrigate most crops, and asparagus included in that. But if you do irrigate, you might be able to increase your yields. So you invest extra money in each acre of asparagus, but you can be more sure of getting a certain amount, and that amount will probably be higher than if you're relying on just regular rainfall. So that was a very local, family-based experience, right? I was in college, like you guys. I decided I wanted to study abroad. I ended up going to South Africa. I had to do an independent study project, and so I found myself in this little town called Ndumo, in the far northeast corner of South Africa, so right by the borders with Mozambique and Swaziland. It was a fascinating place, a beautiful place, some great people there. What I ended up really interested in and writing my study paper about was a group of farmers who had started growing cotton and were figuring out what sort of irrigation system to put in. There were some international aid organizations that were willing to contribute some money to help these farmers put in irrigation, and the farmers were having a hard time doing a cost-benefit analysis, looking at each of the different options. Should we do a center pivot system? It's going to be more money to make it. It's going to be more specialized, so maintenance might be a little more out of our hands, but it is the most effective at getting the water out there. It's going to require a bigger pump than some of the other systems. So again, higher upfront investment, but it should do the most as far as improving yields. You could look at, so there were a couple different kind of intermediate options. So of course one option is not to do any irrigation, but some intermediate options involved pumping water and either basically using gravity to let it run down trenches and enter the soil that way, or to use, much like what we're familiar with from yards and golf courses and places, sprinkler head sort of sprinkler system for irrigation. And so the farmers were having a hard time coordinating with the different aid organizations and government organizations and tribal authorities and figuring out, of course, there's disagreement. Some people want to do one thing, others think another is best. So I didn't do a formal cost-benefit analysis of them. I didn't even really help them address the merits of the different systems. My role, I basically stepped in and said, I'm interested in what's going on. I would like to help. How can I help? And what they wanted was help kind of laying out who the different decision makers were, where the money was coming from for the system, for the maintenance, who was involved in making these decisions. What role did the farmers and their organization, their association that brought them together play? It was a fascinating project. I hope that I was helpful. I think that I was. I hope that I was. It's one of those things that I actually turned back to. So this is 15 years later, and that's a paper I still turn back to sometimes, and I read over sections and say, that was kind of cool. And I think a reason that it had that sort of effect is it tied closely to things I was interested in and things that I had some familiarity with because of my family background. Now, just because I did something very local in Michigan and worked on a very local project in South Africa doesn't instantly make it global, right? So there's an international element, of course, but the really cool thing, what all of that motivated me to do after graduating from undergrad was to help start a nonprofit that worked with local students. I was in Chicago, and so we were working with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders in Chicago public school system and doing computer training for them so they could connect with people in other parts of the world, learn about other parts of the world. And as part of that, I got to be kind of a reporter and travel to other places and visit schools there and link them up with our kids back in Chicago. So then it really got global. So a lot of the things that I had been interested in all along, I was looking at irrigation and agriculture and environmental issues, how we use water, how it affects people's daily lives. And I was looking at that in Australia and Indonesia and Thailand and India and Sri Lanka and the Middle East, Northern Africa. Really interesting tying these different things together. And so I mention that now because I know many of you are starting to turn to your final paper in earnest, and I hope you find a topic that is interesting for you, that has some ties to your background perhaps, or just something that really piques your interest. This could just be a paper. It doesn't have to be a high pressure sort of thing. That is fine. But it could also be a spark for some really cool career trajectory or adventure. So write about something you're interested in. It makes it much more likely that the thing you learn more about here could help propel you on to something fun and interesting in the future. I want to share a few thoughts about addressing things at the local to global scale. I actually, looking at the time on this video, I want to keep it short. So why don't we have a safe and restful Thanksgiving break, and we'll talk a little bit when we get back about figuring out what level to address an issue at, whether it should be local, state, federal, global. We'll talk about that after Thanksgiving break. Best of luck with things. Reach out to me if I can help with anything. Stay safe. Thank you guys, and happy Thanksgiving.